There is no America. There is no democracy. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business. And I have chosen you to preach this evangel.
For all my free market healthcare robbing, stock stealing, retirement fund fucking with niggas. Fuck you little credit card scamming, jewelry stealing, crack selling, liquor store robbing motherfuckers. Shout to the homies, Carnegie, OG, Willie Randolph Hearst, Baruch, Rockefeller, the real Rockefeller, my main bitch Leona, pour out a little Louis XIII, Scott Rothstein, Jack Abramoff, hold your head, my real top niggas, let's get this money. I spend my day pepping America overseas, pension for the workers, nigga please, embezzlement, etiquette, private settlement, I'm better with Confederate rhetoric from my mansion in Connecticut, foreclose a big close out the tenement, I twist words like a speech impediment, I hope you got good credit bitch, if not better get a new job with benefits, while I play golf with niggas to get cheddar with, new money buys brand new carrots, my old money bunch of great grandparents, you got grills in your mouth, I ain't mad at you, I own every gold mine in South Africa, thanks baby, you made me $1 billion, plus I own a building, for each one of my children.
Welcome everybody to Voice of Rebellion Radio. This is your host, Chris J. Here it is right now live Friday afternoon, 12 o'clock, noon on the East Coast. Still morning on the West Coast. It's 9 a.m. over there. Thanks everyone who has tuned into this edition of Voice of Rebellion Radio. We are talking about Trump, World War III, and imperialism on today's show. And start off with the first one, the pressing topics of the week is the fact that Trump announced Monday that we will be continuing the quagmire in Afghanistan, or sending even more troops to Afghanistan. And this is marks now been 16 years in Afghanistan, and really 20 odd years in the Middle East and these misadventures, going for what they say is defeating of terrorism. However, that seems to be a pretty dubious claim when you see what goals have actually been achieved, and it seems that the defeating of terrorism has been one of them. And right now, the Taliban controls, as what they claim, 30% of the country, and despite the long efforts to defeat terrorism, and you see the United States aiding Salafist terrorists in Syria against the Assad government, which also is another development that we've been seeing in the last few months, is this heightened tension in Syria and Iran. And it's not too long before one of these little accidents or one of these little skirmishes turns into a much larger conflict, as we've seen multiple times the United States or Israel attacking Syrian soldiers belonging to the government. While they couldn't be fighting terrorism, they are aiding the terrorists in their fight against the Syrian government. And they try to claim on the mainstream media that it's Syrian rebels, and that the Syrian rebels they are people we can trust, and that they're fighting the extremists amongst the rebels, pretty much is what they're saying, or that the extremists, they're pretty much trying to say that the extremists are not part of the rebels, this is separate from the rebels, which is not the case. It's really just one large, broad opposition that are loosely working with each other. But anyways, even the so-called moderates are extreme, they're working with extremists, they've done extremist tactics, very horrific stuff has been committed by the Free Syrian Army, who are so-called a moderate faction, and the United States government openly supporting them, covertly supporting the more extremist factions against the Assad government. Most of the military action that we've seen in Syria has been directed in favor of the terrorists against the Syrian government, which they've been trying to pose for, as we've seen in WikiLeaks cables, that they were trying to pose the Syrian government 10 years prior. They were trying to pose as early as 2006, well before the Syrian civil war started, and there's multiple reasons for that. And Iran is also one of those countries that they've had on the target list for a long time, and they've been saying for 30 years that they're 6 months away from a nuclear weapon, which has never been proven to be true, that they actually were that close to building a nuclear weapon, but it seems to be a scare tactic they pull out whenever they want to generate support for a war on Iran. is to scare people with the WMD idea and the mushroom cloud theory. That it's almost Iraq. They theory that they had weapons of mass destruction that never existed, and I much the same thing that people buy into it. That's a big shame because we've seen the script multiple times now, and ultimately, what they're fighting for. It's like a lot of times people like to say that the American soldiers are fighting for God. Well, if your definition of God is an abbreviation of gold, oil, and diamonds, then you may be correct. In Syria, it's definitely oil. In Iraq, there's gold that they were able to take from the Saddam regime. And when it comes to Afghanistan, these Middle Eastern wars, a lot of it has to do with banking. The Rothschild banks being not there. Well, they're going to bring it to their country. And you see Syria, they don't have a Rothschild bank. Iran doesn't have a Rothschild bank. You see how they've been put on the target list for elimination back prior that they were fighting. And it seems like now they're losing their grip on Iraq, and Iraq is now becoming friendly with Iran. So it's like ultimately for them, it seems like maybe for the empire, they finally hit a major brick in the road that it's every time that they progress somewhere in one country, like now they'll be progressing in Afghanistan, they'll probably be losing their grip more and more in Iraq to make the point where it's already, they're already really picked the opposite side of this, regional war. It's even more than just a Syrian civil war. It's ultimately ISIS and the Wahhabi backed mercenaries. They're backed by the Gulf states such as Qatar, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, and countries like that, versus the resistance. And what I call the resistance would be countries like Iraq now, Iran, Syria, that are fighting against the United States and Israel's influences over the region, and also the non-state militaries that are aligned with them. For example, Hezbollah would be a big example of that, is part of the resistance. So that's really this regional thing in the Middle East is there. And ultimately, I think we're getting close to the point where that actually will be a entire regional war. And I could see, a World War III scenario breaking out there if the United States gets involved in Syria, Iran comes to the aid, and then Israel would also be largely involved. So U.S. and Israeli forces fighting off Syrian and Iranian forces in Syria. And it would pretty much, and I think that would spread all across the region. I think there'd be battles from all the way as far east as Islamabad, all the way as far west as Riyadh. I could see if that was ever to break out. And the question then, the big wild card becomes, does Russia get involved? Because Russia is an ally of Iran and Syria. And would they come in to back their allies? Now, that's the thing, is that a lot of people think that automatically that Russia would come in to help their allied countries. I don't believe that to be the case. I believe that Russia would hold off. Because they've shown, for me, the big test is Ukraine, and where they've shown a lot of restraint. And if they could show restraint right there by their own borders, I think they could show restraint, even if it's, when it comes to survival of their two allies, I think they would, rather than get into a cataclysmic, apocalyptic war like the one we would see if United States and Russia were actually duped out. At least for now, I don't see it happening. So I think that if the United States was to fight Iran, it would stay limited to that. It would just be a regional Middle Eastern conflict, but it would be the Middle Eastern conflict of all Middle Eastern conflicts. I think it'd be, you could call it a world war because of the fact that there'd be, America would be there, Iran would be there, two giant powers. I think a lot of the smaller I think the entire Middle East would probably be involved one way or another, on one side or another. It would be all the forces of the Middle East practically fighting a few countries primarily, probably Syria, Iraq, Iran would probably be the center of the fighting. And then there'd probably also be some more fighting in other countries. It'd probably bleed over into countries like Saudi Arabia, some of the Gulf states, I'm sure. Maybe that's why the Gulf states are, or maybe that's why, Qatar has been a little bit more reluctant to the idea of this encroachment against Iran, is that they know that, since they're in a vulnerable position, they're a small country, I believe on that Saudi peninsula. If a war like that was to ever happen, a bleed over into their country very well could happen, and it'd be pretty catastrophic potentially, because it wouldn't take much of a bleed over for it to engulf their small country. And that's so they're keeping them in mind that in the case of a war with Iran, total war on their own territory is a very high possibility. And I think for all the smaller Gulf states, I think there's even the Emirates, there's a slight level of skepticism. That's why they haven't went full into this idea of backing Wahhabi groups across the Middle East. And though they have been a financier of Wahhabi groups in Syria, they haven't been as fervent about it like other countries, a couple of the other Gulf states. Like, for example, and that's the weird thing, is that Qatar might have this little bit of a weaker stance when it comes to Iran, but when it comes to Syria, they've been a pretty big prominent backer of Wahhabi groups in Syria, and they've been backing even more extremist elements, I believe, openly. But some of your bigger countries like Turkey, I'm guessing that they think, well, the bleed over could happen, but it wouldn't engulf their countries easily. So maybe perhaps they're not as scared of the idea of a multinational war happening right there in their backyard, which right now already the Syrian war has bled over into Iraq. Really, it's really like a two-country war at this point, and there's actually been a little bleed over into northern Turkey or southern Turkey with some of the Kurdish clashes happening, I believe past the Syrian border in Turkey. And as well, really, I'm not sure how much of it, I don't think there has been too much into Lebanon, but Lebanon's been their own thing. They've had their own clashes between groups in their own country, between like the resistance fighters would be Hezbollah, and then they had like the South Lebanon Army that was backed by Israel, was like the opposite. And, an important key to understand the Middle East is that the Wahhabis and the Zionists are on the same side. Despite that, it seemed like it'd be totally different ideologies, because one's based on one religion and one's based on another religion. It's still the same kind of fascist ideology of supremacy of a group over the rest of the people. And ultimately, Zionism, Wahhabism is pretty much the same thing. It's still from the same ugly family. And ultimately, the Wahhabis, you have a country like Saudi Arabia, they pretty much are a piece of Israel, 100%. And they've been on the same side of the Syrian conflict. Is a very important key to understand, is that even though they might not have official diplomatic relations, they are definitely on the same side of the war in Syria. And that's kind of like a big key to, like, that seems like where sides have been picked of the Syrian civil war, because it's probably going to be eventually the war where the sides are actually going to come into play. But everyone's like kind of everyone's picked a country or a side to back. You have, like I said, the Gulf states have all backed pretty much the rebels. And then you have more of the Eastern Middle Eastern countries, if that makes any sense to you. A lot of them have, a few of them, like 3 countries primarily, have backed the government side. Of course, Syria being backing themselves, and Iran and Iraq backing the government against ISIS. And then you also have a couple neutral ones, like Pakistan hasn't really had much of a role in the war altogether. But it's not, again, Iran and Pakistan are not really technically Middle East, even though, like, politically I would lump them into the Middle East, because that seems to be where their main matter of concern is. Well, Pakistan, actually, they are kind of like a bridge, because they're also, they've had their long-standing conflict, clash with India for many years, partially over the disputed land of Kashmir. And I was disappointed to find out that I thought the song Kashmir was about Kashmir as in the Pakistani Kashmir, but I think it's actually about a place in Morocco, the Led Zeppelin song. But Kashmir, I think it's a Muslim-dominated area that India controls, and Pakistan has wanted it for a long time. It's just pretty much kind of like a gray area, and it's disputed. And it's been a major point of tension for many years between India and Pakistan, which are equally armed states, and that's why whenever they go at it, it's a little bit alarming. Also, right now, India is now at China's throat right now. So it's, they've had tensions on top of Pakistan and China, and that's one really precarious thing about that little corner right there is you have three nuclear powers right next to each other, Pakistan, China, and India. But the ironic thing is that India and Pakistan are both American allies. So these two countries, they're clashing at each other at times, but they're ultimately still got the same, they're still part of the Western political sphere, and America still backs them, both those countries at the same time. And also as well, it's kind of like the clash or, the kind of the tensions that go on between like countries like, for example, for one example, that could be like, how like in the Libyan civil war, you have two sides that are really pro-American backed. One's the Muslim Brotherhood and one's the official government. However, when you look into it, they have like three different countries. You have like three countries back on one side, three countries back on the other side. But it's like all countries that are supportive of the United States are backing each side of the war. Like on the Muslim Brotherhood side, you have like Turkey, Qatar, and one other country, like Saudi Arabia backs that side. On the other side, you have Egypt, which Sisi's kind of been ambiguous about his stance on the United States and Israel. He's been, he kind of gives hints that he might be, like for example, it seems that he's not 100% back behind the regime change policy in Syria, but at the same time, he's been helping Israel continue to blockade on the Palestinian people. So it's Sisi, though, I think that he's a sellout. So that's why I'll just call him an American ally. And he seems to, right now, he actually knows Trump pretty early into his presidency. It seems that there's relations are pretty much normalized between Egypt and the United States with Sisi in power. So you got Sisi backing the government, the current government there, the Muslim Brotherhood backed by Turkey. I think the Emirates backs the current government in Libya. Now, it's the same one, I believe, that has General Haftar, who's gained extreme prominence. He's like almost becoming a potential down the road, but he's a complete Zionist puppet. He's definitely an agent of the West. And if he takes, I could expect a government similar to maybe the one like Mubarak had in Egypt prior to the revolution in 2011. That's the kind of government I could see under Haftar if he stays permanently. There's also a good chance, the Green Libyan forces have been gaining strength and people are starting to regret the decision to join the rebels and such. And I think that Libya could potentially see a return to Green Libya possibly. It seems far-fetched, but it seems like the amount of support of it's growing. And from what I read, I think I saw that they're getting like positions inside of the Libyan government. So there's potential, the Libyan government's realizing that they need to reach out to them, because if they don't reach out to them, they might be replaced by them. So like the Libyan government, I think, is trying to give concessions to the Green Libyan government, which just a few years ago would have been absolutely insane, asinine to talk like that, because the Libyan government was committed towards, punishing for these people for supposed crimes against humanity or war crimes, and now they're reaching out to them. I think there's also good potential, that there might be a revolt inside the government if that happens, if it's loaded with pro-Gaddafi members, and, Haftar is still going along with pro-American policies and such, that they'll revolt, and there could be like a coup or something, similar to how they got into power the first way, was back in 1969, a coup against King Idris. We could see a repeat possibly in 1969. And what's funny is actually I thought it might even happen on the 50th anniversary or something, because I predicted that I think by the end of the decade we'll see the Libyan situation settle down. I think that it will happen. I'm hoping. I think it's more likely than not that the government of Libya may not be a complete return to the Jamahiriya of Libya that we saw prior to 2011, but I see it being either loaded with pro-Gaddafi members in the government, or potentially a total takeover by pro-Gaddafi militias and such of Tripoli, and by the end of the decade. And that would mark 50 years since the original, since the coup that brought, it was a bloodless coup, by the way, that brought Muammar Gaddafi to power in the first place. And I know it's sons that are, a couple of sons, or a few of the sons that seem still alive, is that I don't know if the one that actually was like political, very political, could actually be trusted, because I know he has like Western links and stuff like that. I don't know if he's exactly trustworthy, and I find it suspicious that they let him out of prison so easily, and I think there might be a reason for that. So I don't know if perhaps a new green Libya should not have a Gaddafi in power, because I don't know, up to the challenge father took part of. And, there's another one, I think Saudi Gaddafi still alive, but the problem with him is that he's not political at all. He was he was an aspiring football and soccer player. However, and then he is kind of a slight disgrace figure in Libya because of a whole scandal where apparently they found like gay pornography or something like that in his residence. I don't know, something along that line. Regardless of that, I don't think he's going to be anywhere for politics when it comes down to it. But right now, the situation in Libya. It said that, the Saif al-Islam, which is the one that was involved, free. Last year by the Eastern Coast. We have decided to liberate Saif al-Islam. Muammar Gaddafi is now free and has left the city of Zintan, the militia said in a statement. However, it is unclear whether Saif has left Zintan and its freedom in Libya is partial, while the Eastern Parliament in Tobruk, to which Zintan is aligned, says he's a free man. Tripoli's UN-backed government still considers him a war criminal. That's the main government still considers him a war criminal after a court sentenced him to death in absentia in 2015 for crimes during the revolution. If Saif leaves Libya, he may also face arrest on the indictment from the International Criminal Court for war crimes and crimes against humanity. His British lawyer, Karim Khan QC, said he was unable to confirm or deny reports of Saif's freedom, but added he was in regular contact with his client, last visiting him in autumn. I met him in Zintan, and I've been in contact with him in relation to his issue. He said he was in good physical health. I had lunch with him in Zintan and sat for several hours. Saif al-Islam, his name means sword of Islam, was once considered heir apparent to his late father before the 2011 Arab Spring Revolution. He lived in a €10 million mansion in Hampstead, London. See, this is where I talk about the Western links. Was awarded a controversial doctorate from the London School of Economics. Well, it says right here, this is what it says could be disinfo, because it was from The Guardian, made to discredit him, but including the billionaire hedge fund investor, and believe it or not, I'm going to say it, Nat Rothschild, labor peer Peter Mandelson, and architect Norman Foster. He had no formal job under his father's regime, but before the revolution, before the revolution that called for democratic reforms during the uprising, he demanded harsh measures against rebel forces. When Libyan rebel forces backed by NATO airstrikes captured Tripoli, he fled south in the Sahara by the October. Turns to emerge as a political actor in Libya's chaotic and changing fabric. The tribe he formally backed his father likely before, along with the militia once fought against his father. country's been ravaged by civil war, with Tobruk forces in recent weeks capturing key air bases in the interior. Saif's release comes a year after Tobruk forces allowed his mother, Saifa, to visit eastern Libya and follows a ruling in March by the European Court of Justice to lift a travel ban on Saif's sister, Aisha, who lives with her mother in Oman. Two of Saif's brothers, Mutasim and Kamis, died in the revolution, while a third, Hannibal, lives in Lebanon. His younger brother, Saadi, is detained in Tripoli awaiting trial on crime charges. So it's Saadi. I remember, I wasn't sure if he got captured or killed or was out, but there it is, he's captured. And finding an article I saw about the whole situation, and when it comes to the pro-Gaddafi forces, that there's like 3 different factions apparently between them, and let me type there, let's see, turn of Libyan Jahamaria. You know, I was finding it interesting how would be the Libyan situation would be the official stance by our government if Libya was ever pro-Gaddafi regime, because, you know, right now we have Donald Trump in power, in power, I put that in quotes. We have Donald Trump in the House right now, and he's somebody that has claimed that he did not want, he claimed that he did not call for Gaddafi's removal from power in 2011. It says that Libya would be better off with Muammar Gaddafi. However, we look at the tapes in 2011, and he's clear as day calling out for the removal of Muammar Gaddafi, and was pretty much parodying the same kind of NATO propaganda and mainstream media propaganda at the time from the Trump Tower. We see this video being taken. So Donald Trump is obviously lying about the fact that he's claiming that he never supported the removal of Muammar Gaddafi. And also, I think it's similar to the talk that before he actually got into the White House, you know, Syria took a different stance and not even back the rebels. Now we're seeing still a full-fledged backing the rebels and a full-fledged assault against the Syrian government. So I think it's the same. He's called the Gaddafi's made this is it. One the Social Jahamaria, and now his son has been released from prison to a year's welcome movement in the ascendancy. Various months during the destruction of Libya that were supposed to support the crown Western supremacy over institutions, implication over all African and Arab people. The fall of Tripoli in August 2011 that came soon after. All of them Pyrrhic victories, but none more so than the death sentence handed down to Gaddafi's son and effective deputy leader Saif al-Gaddafi in July 2015. Saif had been captured by the Zintan militia shortly after his father and brother were killed by NATO's death squads in late 2011. The ICC, a neo-colonial farce which has only ever indicted Africans, demanded he be handed over to them. But the Zintan, fiercely patriotic despite having fought with NATO against Gaddafi, refused. Over the next 2 years, the country descended into chaos and societal collapse that Gaddafi had predicted, sliding inexorably towards civil war. By 2014, the country's militias had coalesced around 2 main groupings. The Libyan National Army, composed of those who supported the newly elected and mainly secular House of Representatives in the Libyan Dawn Coalition, composed of the militias who supported the Islamist parties that had dominated the country's previous parliament but refused to recognize their defeat at the polls in 2014. After fierce fighting, the Libyan Dawn faction took control of Tripoli. It was there Saif, along with dozens of other officials of Jahamaria, the Libyan People State, which Gaddafi had led for her life. Number one, the Libyan National Army refusing condemned by human rights groups as brutal and flaw with legal flaws in a court system dominated by the Libyan Dawn militias, and absent Saif was sentenced to death, along with 8 other former government officials. Trial was never recognized by the elected government, by then relocated to Tobruk. Gloating Western media made sure to inform the world of the death sentence, which they hoped would extinguish forever the Libyan people's hope for restoration of the independence, peace, and prosperity family name come to represent. It was a hope that would soon be dashed. The arranged interview with Saif Ali Gaddafi's lawyer Karim Khan, in which it was revealed to the world that Saif, in fact, had been given liberty on April 12, 2016, in accordance with all capital government the previous year. Given the crowing over Saif's death sentence this year and his indictment by ICC, this was a major story. Yet, by large, is one that Western media chose to steadfastly ignore. The BBC did not breathe a single word about it. What is so significant about his release, however, is what it represents. The recognition by Libya's elected authorities that there is no future for Libya without the involvement of the Jamahiriya movement. The truth is the movement never went away. Rather, having been forced underground in 2011, it has been increasingly coming out into the open, building up support amongst a population sick of the depravities and deprivations of the post-Gaddafi era. Exactly 5 years ago, following the start of the NATO bombing campaign, Libyans came out onto the streets in massive demonstrations supported the government in Tripoli, territory of Gaddafi's homeland, by the way, Zilton and elsewhere. Even the BBC admitted that there is no discount in the genuine support that exists. That Muammar is the love of millions was the message written on the hands of women in the square. Following the United States, the United Kingdom, Qatari invasion of Tripoli, the following months, however, the reign of terror by No's death squad that or militias assured that public could end up one fight. Tens of thousands of suspected Gaddafi supporters were rounded up by the militias and made of rights. About 7,000 arrested there to this day have been summarily executed. Black people, in particular, were targeted, seen as symbolic of the pro-action perceived by Gaddafi, but hated by supremacist militia. With the black Libyan town of Tawerga turned into a ghost town overnight as Misratian militias made good on their promise to kill all those who refused to leave. Such activities were effectively legalized by the NATO-imposed Transitional National Council, whose Law 3738 decreed that public support for Gaddafi could be punished by life imprisonment and activities taken in defense of the revolution would be exempt from prosecution. Nevertheless, over the years that followed, as the militias turned on each other, the country rapidly fell apart. Just southern Libya. The southern city of Sabah was taken by Gaddafi loyalists, rightening the new government enough to emergency ban Libya's two pro-Gaddafi satellite stations and embark on aerial bombing missions in the south of the country. But it was ironically the passing of the death of Gaddafi for good that triggered the most open and widespread demonstration support the former government so far held in August 2015 across the country, and ISIS held in Sabah, in which number of protesters. Previous modest pro-Gaddafi celebrations in the town had been overlooked by the Misratan-led 3rd Force station in Sabah for over a year, originally to act as a peacekeeping force following local clashes. This time, I think the 3rd Force saw the future of the pro-Gaddafi movement, because a demonstration this big has not been seen in the last 4 years, said Mohammed. There were a lot of people, including women and children, and people were not afraid to show their faces. The Islamic State had threatened to shoot anyone who protested on Friday. There are no green flags in the towns they control apart from Thursday. There are some green flags flying in remote desert areas. They said more green flags. I know many people who are just waiting. Thursday demonstrators had by including women. The same Middle East Eye reported the following comment. The protests have made a public representation of a badly kept secret in Libya, that the pro-Gaddafi movement, which has existed, revolution has grown. Born out dissatisfaction of life has worked out for many ordinary citizens in the last 4 years. Mohammed added that some people who had originally supported the 2011 revolution had joined the protest. Most Libyans just want a quiet life. They don't care if it takes over. Libya's money. There'll be good subsidies on all the essentials, and it was cheap. Some facts, if I can find it. It's a long article. I think this might have been it. Well, I actually read almost the entire thing. But it said at the same time, the Green Resistance is becoming an increasingly influential force in the Libyan National Army, representing the country's elected House of Representatives. Earlier this year, the Tobruk government allowed Gaddafi to widow back in the country, whilst the LNA entered into alliance with pro-Gaddafi tribes in the country's east and began to support Gaddafi during Gaddafi. Already seized massive. And this is what somebody wrote. Mohammed Eldra, writing in the conservative U.S. Journal Foreign Policy, added that these pro-Gaddafi protests have the potential to turn into a national movement against the 2011 revolution, not least because a growing number of Libyans are deeply disillusioned by its outcome. There is now the building sense that their atrocities and abuses by the post-Gaddafi group since the revolution exceeded by far those committed by the Gaddafi regime turned its fool. Article actually, it was a pretty interesting article because it pretty much talked about the different factions that are within even the pro-Gaddafi movement. You know, there's many different factions in Libya, and that's what's became right now. It's like a Mad Max Beyond the Thunderdome scenario, where you have one tribe on one town, one militia controlling the other town, and it's just pretty much a free-for-all. And the country has fallen into a state of chaos that never existed under the Gaddafi regime. And it's exactly what Gaddafi warned would happen in 2011 when he was nearing his disposal, that this is exactly the kind of thing that would happen. And also, he predicted that there would be a surge in terrorism in Europe, as we're seeing right now. It's funny that Gaddafi, he said exactly what would happen, but everyone took him as a madman, and they were just like, oh, whatever, we'll just oppose the government there anyways. It's not like that stuff's actually going to happen. Now we're actually seeing a surge in terrorist attacks coming into Europe, and, you know, we're seeing, really, it's all across Europe a problem too. Germany, France, there seems to be this flood, and partially it's based on just the flood of people that are coming from Libya. You know, that we have, I think, millions of people have left of Libya, and you have so many of them going to Europe that they're just, by pure statistics, a few of those people are going to be bad apples, if you will, and they're going to commit terrorist attacks because some of these people belong to terror ranks, such as ISIS and the other terror groups from Libya. It's that the situation in Libya is very similar to the situation that happened in Syria. Is that ultimately these are Islamists that are thinly veiled, really. You know, these are, to a lot of the world, it's very apparent what the Islamists in Syria are. It was the same thing in Libya, that they brought a lot of Islamists into the ranks of the rebels. You know, and supposedly there was these moderate rebels that were fighting against Muammar Gaddafi. The whole idea of the moderate rebel in the Middle East seems to be a long-going joke almost in the United States foreign policy. As that in Afghanistan, it was the same thing in the 80s. The Mujahideen were supposedly moderates, but then later they would form the Taliban and bring Afghanistan back into the dark ages practically when the Taliban took over in the 1990s. And in fact, it went on all the way into all the way to 2001, pretty much the Mujahideen, or what spawned off Mujahideen, the Taliban, was in power. And ultimately what was the final straw for the United States, not, many of the repressions committed by the 1990s, but ultimately the thing that forced them to intervene was when Muhammad Omar, the leader of the Taliban, in 2000, banned the sale of opium. I believe he banned the growing of opium in this country. And when the poppy growers were no longer to grow the product there, all of a sudden 99% of Afghanistan's opium was gone. 3/4 of the world's opium was gone. So big pharma and the drug traffickers are involved in our government, and also the money laundering that they do, big banks do with opium, was all of a sudden unavailable. So that had to come to an end. And all of a sudden, now we need to go in there to stop terrorism in 2001. And we've been in there since. 15 years later, we're still in Afghanistan. And it became America's longest war. We're talking about 16 years. It's insane when you think about it. So now, and people actually are so convinced to this day that the war in Afghanistan is about terrorism. It's a leftover from, people still think, that Afghanistan actually has something to do with 9/11. They still think bin Laden actually did 9/11. Bin Laden was a CIA agent who probably wasn't killed in 2011 either, and ultimately 9/11 was an inside job. I mean, how many times do we have to say that? I mean, we're almost coming up on the 16th anniversary now. People don't get that those buildings could have came down the way they did, straight on their own footprint, without tipping over or anything like that, at near free fall speed. World Trade Center 7 came down, I think, at free fall speed. It was so incredibly fast. World Trade Center 7 coming down, a 47-story building, and we've seen the video before. Most of us that are listening to this radio show, I'm sure, of that building going into its own footprint so quickly. The ultimate smoking gun, World Trade Center 7, and you had people on BBC, like 30 minutes prior to the building actually collapsing, talking about how that building was going to collapse, or had already collapsed, when it was right there in the background, because it was only 4:30 in the afternoon. The building didn't collapse till like 5:21, I think, Eastern time. And then there's just so many. The firefighters talk about, we got to pull it, or maybe it's the demolition crew, but there's something, they got to pull it. The little tiny explosions you see as that building's collapsing, with charges, renovations being done to the building weeks prior to it. A couple months prior, Larry Silverstein pulling out a insurance to cover terrorism, where he was able to make $4.5 billion after he sued because of two towers. He said he should get double, and he did get double. He got $4.5 billion off the towers collapsing. Everything that happened afterwards, early moving systems, if you haven't checked that out, Mossad vans that were going around New York City. The Mossad van with a large amount of explosives that was caught on the George Washington Bridge. There was the van with the mural on it that had a plane going by the Twin Towers, looked like going into the Twin Towers, which is exactly what happened that day, dancing Israelis, 5 Israelis that were filming the plane going into the World Trade Center, and then they were actually arrested, and they were dancing as the plane went into the tower. So, you had many Israelis were arrested around New York City that day, but they were sent back home, like once they were debriefed, I'm guessing. Mossad was definitely involved, and that's one element of the 9/11 truth that people ignore, but it's very pertinent, and we need to expose is the Israeli element, along with the American element, which includes stuff like Dick Cheney telling NORAD to stand down. I think Bush's expressionless face speaks a million words, that he's being told that a massive travesty has just happened in America, and he continues to read to those kids that it's getting right to that work, that the potential that America was under a full-fledged attack, but Bush seems totally calm about it. Now you're going to tell me that he's one of the coolest heads that ever existed? I don't think so. I think that he's just been on what he already knew was going to happen. Maybe some memes have said it's like, oh shit, we were doing that today. That's like his face is rated. It's not really funny, but I guess sometimes you have to try to make light of some of these really deep and dark issues when it comes to our government and false flags. But and also, it's not the first time that they've done a false flag. I mean, look at Operation Northwoods. They were trying to do a false flag by blowing up a airliner and blaming it on Cuba, but JFK rejected it. Let's look at 1964 Gulf of Tonkin incident that never happened, but ultimately that led to the North Vietnam happening. The War Powers Act, I think, was initiated because of that, where LBJ pretty much the power to initiate the war on Vietnam. And by the way, I think today is the 106th birthday of General von Gee, the North Vietnamese general that was pretty much responsible against the Americans in the war. He actually died just a few years back in 2013. I think it was like September 2013 he died. He lived a very long life, but I thought that was notable. He was practically second in command to Ho Chi Minh when it came to the military effort. And now, going back to the false flags, many throughout history, the Lusitania, the British knew where the German submarines were. The Germans warned that they would blow it up. They said there was no arms in the ship. There was actually arms in the ship. There was also Churchill was high up in the British Navy at the time. In fact, he was probably had a large personal responsibility in the Lusitania sinking and getting us into World War I. And of course, I think the Zimmerman telegram was probably I think that was like the equivalent of the Russia hacked the elections of 1917. 100 years ago, they had similar to back then. Germany was the bad guys, and they were trying to tell you that Germany was trying to get Mexico to invade the United States, which was unsuccessful. And at the same time, I have a feeling it wasn't real. I mean, Woodrow Wilson was one of the biggest con men in American history. He's the one that signed the Federal Reserve Act. He was the banker's boy, and he also, he so disastrous. He signed the Federal Reserve Act. He got us into the First World War, and he also signed Prohibition into law, which was a disaster, and pretty much brought up bootleggers and organized crime to a high. I mean, I guess it might be and the Kennedys, JFK having a run at the presidency in 1960, so he might have done that part good. So it's like the ironic thing is that by him signing that bill that seems totally unrelated in 1920, he might have actually brought about one of the biggest challenges to the bill they signed earlier, the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, 50 years later, because Prohibition brought about people like Joe Kennedy in order to make their millions. But I think the Kennedy's been a prominent family for a long time. In fact, the Kennedy family, I believe, is I don't know how true it is, but I interviewed Fritz Springmeier, who wrote about the 13 powerful families that are pretty much the helm of the New World Order. His book, The 13 Families of the 13 Bloodlines of the Illuminati, and they wrote in the 1990s. One of them is the Kennedy family, I believe. And so the Kennedy family, they might go way back to, how many hundreds of years, maybe even thousands of years when it comes to the times they go back, way back. She was kind of like a rebel child off of the Kennedy bloodline. That may be, but it'd be funny. I was thinking, it's still, imagine if that would be the irony if that actually was the case, that ultimately, if the Prohibition wouldn't have happened, Joe Kennedy would have never became rich, and Joe Kennedy would have never been able to help his son like he did, and JFK would have never became president. Probably Nixon would have won, I imagine, in 1960. Which I don't know if we would all be here if Nixon was the president then, because that means they would have probably been there during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Also, I have a feeling that he would have approved of Operation Northwood, so he probably would have started the war against the Soviet Union before even the Cuban Missile Crisis. He would have got us into invading Cuba, and then probably within not too long he would have been confronting the Soviet Union. So I have a feeling that at some point in that presidency, it would have been just so disastrous. I'm pretty sure we'd just been engulfed in the war. Nixon was talking about during Vietnam of using nuclear weapons. And one thing that's not talked about too much is how close we were to total disaster during Vietnam. We almost used nuclear weapons. And we actually almost used nuclear weapons quite a few times after World War II. That it wasn't like the atomic bomb was used, and as soon as the Soviets got the atomic weapons, that all of a sudden, okay, oh shit, they got them now. That means we can't use them. Now that was in the minds of a lot of people in the higher ups of the government. Like MacArthur, he was talking about using nuclear weapons against China in the 1950s. They got fired by Truman, which I think was just more of a PR thing. I don't think that he really disapproved necessarily as much when it came to the idea of using nuclear weapons. It's just that he didn't want that kind of legacy, I guess, as being the one that started all that nuclear war. And Truman was the first, that thing that actually happened. It's like, I already used 2 nuclear weapons. I don't need to be using 2 more. He was thinking about using it against China, I think, as a response to the Korean War. And, also the Korean War, we got into a direct fight pretty much with China. It's kind of a not talked about too much story, but American military pretty much got their asses handed to them by the Chinese military, which, it's like one of those rare cases where I would very, very rarely, after World War II, I don't see the United States hasn't really fought any valiant or noble wars of any kind. But if they would have pushed ahead and pushed the Chinese all the way back to Beijing and took out Mao's military, which was a part of the bankers' plan, but if Mao was taken out by the United States military, then I would have probably approved that because of the things that Mao would do 10 years after that during the Great Leap Forward, killing tens of millions of soldiers, or not soldiers, people, via starvation and similar means. People that deny that this happened, genocide by Mao Zedong, or pretty much the same kind of people that try to say that Holodomor and all the starving and people in gulag placements by Stalin were either justified or, the starvations were fake and that the gulag placements were justified. They could be as annoying as the fascists on the internet that pushed this kind of idea about that Mao was somehow a noble leader that didn't do, that he totally perfected the lives of the Chinese people and that they were nothing before Mao and then afterwards they were a prominent country. I would disagree with that. I think that in some ways Mao made the country weaker than it was prior to Mao's arrival, because if you look at the history, they fought off pretty well the Japanese superpower military that invaded. I mean, they took a giant price, but it was, the kind of effort that they put in. And that's the thing. The 2 countries that really put the biggest effort into World War II are the ones you hear about the least really. It's Russia and China. I mean, Russia lost about 30 million, and China lost at minimum 10 million. So they lost 40 million, but you hear the most really about the United States and Britain. And the United States and Britain, they lost a total of what? I think maybe 2 or 3 million total, and that's a lot of it's British. America, they only lost 500,000. I know only. However, the people that had the biggest roles in World War II were definitely Russia and China. And Russia on the European front and China on the Pacific front. And also, they don't talk about that. It's kind of weird how just those people that were technically allies during World War II would later become many of the adversaries or many of the antagonists of the Cold War. For example, Ho Chi Minh was an ally, technically, fighting against the Japanese. Kim Il-sung was an ally fighting against the Japanese. And was actually a guerrilla fighter, pretty much. And South Korea's, Park Chung-hee, who later or Park Chung-lee, it's Park Chung-hee. Park Chung-hee, I think, Park Chung-hee, I think, was the leader. The dictator from that died in 1979 was assassinated. Well, I know that he worked with the Japanese. He actually was on the Axis, believe it or not. And also, a couple of America's strongest Cold War allies, Francisco Franco and Antonio Salazar, were I'm pretty sure they were both Axis. So a lot of the allies that we stood behind later would become our antagonists, or at least our government's antagonists, not the American people's antagonists. And then our government would end up pretty much saying with former fascist Nazis and people that collaborated, a lot of them, with the Nazis. A lot of those guys came over here to work for our government. Look up Operation Paper. Very real. I think it was like the first official mission that the CIA did was bringing all these guys over, scientists, analysts, and even the highest up example, is that the Nazi chiefs of staff in the 1940s, he was the Nazi chiefs of staff on the highest positions in the German government, became the NATO chiefs of staff, one of the highest positions that he could hold in Washington, D.C., West in general. And that was Adolf Husinger. And it was also with a guy with literally named Adolf. That's how it just really tell all of what happened in between 1945 and 1950. It was just transfer over of a lot of these people from Nazi Germany to the United States. So that's why I find it a little bit odd. I'll call it out what it is, that this is definitely what has happened in America is a turn towards fascism. It's not communism. A lot of people like to say that America's turned into a communist state. But the thing is that there is not a lot of differences between Stalinism / Maoism and fascism, Nazism. It's pretty much very similar. The extreme authoritarian and the extreme authoritarian right. A lot of people actually think that Stalinism and Maoism, like classic political experts, they believe that should be really right-wing ideologies of the far right, because at that point, economic theory and such is not really the main basis. It's not really about class warfare anymore. It's really our class struggle. It's more about total obedience to the state. Sometimes even racial elements, get involved. I believe there were little bits of racial elements that were put into a Stalin regime between 1924, 1953, where some estimates show that 30 million were killed. That's like the pretty much generally accepted number. About 30 million were killed by Joseph Stalin. I think it's not these absurd numbers that some people try to push. I think some people even legitimately believe 100 million were killed by Joseph Stalin, which is literally an impossibility. I mean, I think that couldn't have been hid from history, because that'd be literally like almost a half of the Soviet Union's population at the time eliminated. I don't think it was 100 million. I don't know if they're counting maybe like German war victims and, like Axis powers, people from Axis powers that were killed, and many other things that they contribute, but 100 million is impossible. There's some people, also say like Mao killed 80 million. Also, that's another high estimate that I don't know if it's possible if he actually killed 80 million in China. I think the more realistic number is 45 million. Still, absolutely horrific numbers. And also, there's a common denominator in those two countries that there was gun control. And gun control makes genocide possible. I mean, that's what happened there. Germany, people will dispute this. Sometimes the far righters, they love to point out the fact that certain people had guns in Germany. Yeah, citizens were allowed to have guns, but citizenship was like a subjective term that was easily revoked in Nazi Germany. So it was like if you were allied with the government, pretty much if you were like a supporter of the government, yeah, you could have guns, which doesn't have to defeat the whole purpose of having guns to prevent government tyranny if only government supporters have the guns in the first place. So, Nazi Germany's supposed liberal gun laws was actually kind of a myth in itself. But yeah, it doesn't appear there was total gun control in Germany. Unlike, I think, in Stalin's Russia, there was absolute gun control. And one thing that one of the funniest excuses I've seen from like an internet Stalinist was that they tried to say that the Oh, yeah, the guns were taken in preparation for World War II, which is funny because the war didn't start for another 10 years after the point that they were taken in 1929, and Nazi Germany didn't exist for another 4 years. It was still the Weimar Republic, and there was no sign that there was going to be another World War. I mean, many people that were really looking into it might have thought there was going to, but I don't think that was the reason why in 1929, when Stalin was consolidating his power, as he was eliminating many of his enemies, was the reason why he got rid of guns. In fact, that was the year that Trotsky was, I think he was exiled that year, which I know Trotsky was a piece of shit too. He was a major part of Red Terror. But I'm saying that a lot of his internal party enemies and such were being liquidated in those few years. Stalin pretty much got rid of most of the people that actually got him to power in the first place. You know, that Trotsky didn't lead the Red Army during the Revolution. Stalin really wasn't, I don't think he had the most amount of power, really. But ultimately, he ended up feeding it at the end. It was kind of a weird process to happen. But Stalin and Lenin, Trotsky, it's all the same Bolshevikism that was backed by Wall Street. I mean, look up Jacob Schiff and look at the fact that they killed, they killed that. They were going with 30 million during the Stalinist regime, and they killed a good solid 4 million when Lenin was still in power during the Russian Civil War. They tore down churches. They committed mass acts of oppression, and they threw many people in gulags where they wasted away and worked in horrific environments. And there's a reason why, you know, Putin recognized it makes people read the Gulag Archipelago. I think it's a required book now in Russian education, is because this was this is not a great era in Russian history, and it's pretty much a time when the Russian identity was revoked and replaced with the Soviet identity. In many ways, you could say that almost like Russia was like a Star Wars reference. It's almost like the story of Anakin Skywalker, and during that Anakin was a very powerful young Jedi. Was, you know, by 1917 could have became was at the height of his power. Would have been like Anakin the third movie. You know, he could have became a Jedi Master, or when it comes to Russia's point, is that after World War I, perhaps becoming a superpower that would have been strong than really any superpower. Like Anakin could have become the most powerful Jedi Master ever. However, he was seduced by the dark side. And in their case, I guess you could say that a lot of the people were duped by the Bolsheviks, and also that really just that one, you know, for him, he was seduced by the Emperor, or he called himself Chancellor Palpatine. Ultimately, the Bolsheviks, I guess you could say, duped the people, and the Bolsheviks behind the Bolsheviks were the bankers, like really behind Chancellor Palpatine, just a mask, and ultimately it was Star Sidious, Lord, behind it. So ultimately they fell, and, you know, ultimately it costed Russia became a shadow of what it once was. Yes, they might have became very powerful, but ultimately they were still became a hideous monster compared to what it was during in old Russia. Is that ultimately during the Stalinist terror, these horrible purges and people, there's the whole religious identity of the country being revoked. And then finally, after, you know, when it came to the brink in 1999, as the story's concluding, episode 6 is redeemed by Vladimir Putin, which I guess Vladimir Putin made to represent, I'm not sure what that made us, Luke Skywalker himself. He turned Russia back to good, and turned to the people. The people realized the identity of Russia as being the traditional Russia, not Soviet Russia. I mean, it kind of works. I think it was a decent analogy. Anyways, I've been nerding out on the Star Wars films again, so which is kind of a bummer though, knowing that now Star Wars is owned by Disney, which a lot of us know that Walt Disney was like a 33rd degree Mason, and Disney's pretty wicked company in a bad way. Not saying like, oh yeah, wicked man, saying that's wicked as in a evil. That's what sucks, knowing that Star Wars is no longer Lucas film is by its own company or whatever. I think it was now, but now it's definitely ran by Disney. Also seems like the quality of the last movie, 7, kind of wasn't there compared to some of the previous, compared to like even the prequels were, I think, quite a bit better than Episode 7. But anyways, if anybody who wants to call in, the call-in number is going to be 845-277-9223. 845-277-9223. It is 1:05 Eastern Time over here in Florida, and over on the West Coast it is 10:05. And we're here on this afternoon, Friday, August 25th. And for all the people listening on the replay, ucy.tv, thank you guys for tuning in. So right now it would be 10:05 approximately Eastern Time, and 7:05 Pacific Time. This is Chris J. You're listening to Voice of Rebellion Radio. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about Venezuela. Is that there's been a lot of talk the last month, really, ever since the Constituent Assembly was passed, and people went out there with a major victory for the Chavista revolution, and many people went out there and voiced their, and it was a pretty overwhelming response. It seems that a lot of the people want the Bolivarian revolution to continue, despite what they tell you in the media here in America. They try to tell you that the Bolivarian revolution is unpopular, and that the opposition is in demand by many people. But however, it doesn't seem to be a case by how many people went out there to vote for the Constituent Assembly. But I think I believe they got over 8 million votes for that. And now it looks like they're moving forward, and they're going to actually they're going to bring a constitution for the people to vote on very soon, probably next few months, I'm guessing. But the United States government continues to, they put more sanctions on them. They have declared, it's funny, they had I think a pretty misleading article, I think it was the Miami Herald. They said the first economic sanctions against Venezuela. I'm like, what are you talking about? Obama puts against them. They've been massive. There's been all kinds of sanctions against Venezuela that have been passed, and I'm pretty sure there's been economic ones on that whole list of sanctions. However, they said the first ones. They said these were the first sanctions that have been passed against Venezuela, which I think that was a misleading article. But of course, Miami newspaper, which Miami, Florida, for people that don't know, is practically a leftover enclave of former Batista government officials from Cuba that fled after the revolution. And it's like their children and their grandchildren. All these people are but a lot of these people are directly connected to former Batista officials. Some of these people are like, oh yeah, her grandfather was a bodyguard for Batista, or her grandfather was a high-level general, or something like that. The Batista, the taste of Batista is all throughout that city, and it's part of the reason why that place is probably one of the most corrupt cities in America. Miami is by no means a glamour. People always have saw it as very glamorous. People have, I know, ever since Miami Vice, I guess, came out, that they always think of it like the city where, it's kind of like what it really is. It's kind of like a Las Vegas or something like that. A city with no morality, a city with a lot of unsavory characters, former cartel people and stuff like that. I mean, I'm not talking about everybody from Miami, but it's, I don't like it whatsoever, really. I'm glad I don't live there. A lot of Floridians that live in St. Pete or other places in Florida, I think, oh yeah, I wish I lived in Miami. It's like, no, I don't. No, I do not wish I lived in Miami. I'm glad to live Also just a lot. It's a different culture, I think, a bit than St. Pete, Florida, which some of the people here at least are more down to earth. Those people are so glitz and glamour, and it's at least it's my take from what I've seen. But going back to what I said, it's no wonder that a place where you saw, the one side coverage when like playing Latin American leaders dies or something, they'll show all the coverage from the people in Miami speaking. Like when Fidel Castro died, you saw they're interviewing people in Miami. It's always the same kind of person, white. If people don't question that often, the people are white, awesome, probably middle class to upper class Cubans that live in Miami, and they always say, "Oh, I'm glad that Castro died. They're glad that the horrible dictator died." But ultimately, let's realize something: is that Fidel Castro actually helped end segregation on the island. Batista had the system of segregation on the island. There was a fascist dictatorship under Batista, and is that there were more than one just white Cubans there. There's black Cubans, and a lot of those people are in support of Castro, and when they're interviewed, it's a different story, it seems like. You didn't see too many of that, people interviewing what the black Cubans thought of Fidel on the streets of Miami. But it's always the same kind of people that were interviewed, and they didn't interview people too much that actually lived in Cuba to hear what they had to say. But when they did, it was a different story than what the people in Miami were telling you. And it's a little, you ask somebody in New York City and Harlem, where Castro visited, and, Castro, who seemed to actually have cared a little bit about the black community in America more than our own government, they would have something different to say. Palestinians would probably have something different to say because they see the shared struggle against imperialism that Castro did against where they've been, colonized practically by the Zionists. And, it's like when Hugo Chavez died, he had a lot of support for him in Palestine because he was a strong ally of the Palestinian cause, but they were showing Miami. Everything goes back to Miami when these leaders died in Washington. When Ortega died, Daniel Ortega, who was a long-time leader of Nicaragua, he was in the 80s and he came back like 10 years ago. So he's been there quite a while, as the socialist leader of Nicaragua. When he dies, they're going to go back to Miami and they're going to try to portray him as being the monster, as being evil. And it goes on and on and on through different leaders. The biased portrayal of Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner was another example. She was very, very badly treated by the media, and they tried to be terribly corrupt, and I think they tried to say that she eliminated one of her enemies or something like that. And now that her successor is actually acting corrupt and doing many of the things that they said she did, the media is silent about Marcia Macri. But he's pro-Israel, he's pro-UK. They're going to whitewash his whole, what he's actually doing. It won't actually get any coverage made until the day he's overthrown by the people for being a dictator, and he's acting like a dictator. Marcia Macri is acting like a dictator. He's censored media. He's the current leader of Argentina should go already, and I think he's losing a lot of popularity as well. And Brazil, the same way that they replaced, Thursday was via a parliamentary coup. Rousseff was taken out about a year ago and replaced Michael Temer. And now Michael Temer is facing corruption charges himself and is less popular than Rousseff ever was. Michael Temer also is pro-American, pro-Israel, all that. Peru, there's problems there, I'm pretty sure, where they have Pablo Kuczynski, who's I'm pretty sure it's the same deal, pro-Israel, pro-American. You've had these three countries that within a few years have went from left-leaning leaders. They had Humala in Peru, who might not have been the left-leaning, but he definitely was not what Kuczynski is. You went from Rousseff, now to Temer, Argentina Kirchner, to Macri. These guys, just in 3 years, they changed over. And as well, Colombia's always, that's the one country that this whole pink tide Bolivarian revolution, this whole left surge in the 2000s, they never went. They've stayed with America the entire time. There's only one South America that can say that, because even Paraguay was another country where they did a parliamentary coup there. And Fernando Lugo, when he was sick with cancer, was very much a kangaroo proceeding, was deposed from power, and they replaced him with Horacio Cortez, who right now I'm pretty sure Paraguay is going through unprecedented violence that is more than even what's going on in Venezuela. But Venezuela is being financed by the American government, by the Israelis, in order to take down yet again another government that doesn't have a Rothschild Bank, Venezuela. In Caracas, the Rothschild Bank is not there. They want to bring it there. And I'm sure also Trump would like to put a casino there or something. He might get under a presidency of Enrique Capriles, who's been banned from running in politics altogether, and I can't say that I disagree with that decision. As Enrique Capriles is part of this violent opposition that has caused a lot of problems in Venezuela and went a lot further than just peaceful protesting, unlike what's claimed. But that when it comes to right now the media and the trust about the media, the people seem to either think the media is altogether, or they think they're lying. It's because they think that they're lying about Trump, and they are they only think that they still follow mainstream media. Like I saw one guy that was like a Trump supporter say, "Oh, I don't watch mainstream media." Then what is your preferred media? And he says Fox. Fox News is the mainstream media. It's just the lies that they give you. You know, Fox gives you the more conservative, in quotation, mainstream news. MSNBC the more liberal, in quotation. CNN a more liberal center version of the propaganda. But it's ultimately all propaganda and different sets of lies. None of it truthful. And, you know, it was just kind of reversed during the Obama administration, wasn't it? You know, it was like where their stance was, you know, that MSNBC was hard against the current presidency, CNN slightly against the current presidency, and Fox News strongly against, or strongly for, probably, or I would say more like mildly for the current presidency, while during the Obama administration it was MSNBC strongly for, CNN, I would say it was kind of on and off, wasn't it? But I would say it was slightly for, and then Fox News strongly against the Obama administration. And people, you know, and I've had people actually try to say, you know, it's like, oh no, just give Fox News a chance. And like, I've given Fox News a chance. I've watched the program before. It's terrible. It's like, it's mind numbing. And is just kind of like, it's kind of like neutral garbage, MSNBC liberal garbage, Fox is conservative garbage. It all belongs to the same far right end of the spectrum. And Bill O'Reilly, you know, that's one guy that I can't believe people actually were a fan of for all that time. Again, I can't believe, I just don't see people who fan for him on the media. He's talking CNN and all these guys. I mean, I can't for more than me. He used to be good, somewhat. You know, the couple guys were good, I should say. Dylan Radigan, Jesse Ventura. I was really glad he did, actually. And you know, Ed Schultz, I think, was the guy. He wasn't horrible, Ed Schultz, but were horrible. Quickly, all got booted off, and they turned it into this more moderate. We don't think it has to be actually calling for a revolution, and now you haven't heard anything about it again in years. We mutually reached a decision to part, which thinking resign, but he would have been fired if he didn't resign. That would have been that's the real meaning of that. You know, it's like when a lot of times in the professional world, I guess to let that happen. But Radigan, was one of the last ones that really represented any kind of real journalist on any of the mainstream media. And they one a lot of times I see people varying from seem to have a couple of people that kind of more libertarian leaning, perhaps just to try to, as an experiment, may a psyop, see if it can, how many people in the country have those kind of views. Which it's more like a Republican libertarian, two kind of libertarian party. You know, it's kind of hard to say where exactly that is. Some of those people on Judge Paul Arrow. He's I would say he's more like a Republican libertarian potentially, and that's where I also have to be skeptical. A lot of times those guys are still in support of Israel. Graham Paul, for example, a libertarian supposedly, but he's in support of Israel, which no libertarian in a real libertarian sense could be in support of Israel in a form of fascism. It's like I said, Zionism and fascism are two sides of the same coin. And just look at the transfer agreement that ultimately shows that the Zionists and the Nazis collaborated with each other, but that's not talked about by the media or by the textbooks or any of that. And look at today, as that Israel and the neo-Nazis in Western Ukraine have been shown to have been working together, but that's not talked about in the media. It's not talked about in the media. It's not talked about in textbooks. Like I said, it's a recent event, but Western Ukraine being a fascist regime, a neo-Nazi regime that idolizes people like Stepan Bandera and also support Venezuela, and it's funny is that it actually, this is one time where the mainstream media gets it's like almost like this whole thing where they try to make this fake tell the truth for once in some of these articles, like Reuters, as a Trump's threat of Venezuela military action could bolster Maduro. I think they've been like weak opposition supporters back to the Chavista side if they believe it's going to stop a military invasion. But the United States President Donald Trump's talk of possible military action in Venezuela could be a political lifeline for the country's popular leader. See, this is where the bullshit starts, but who has long used U.S. aggression and justice policies that are shorting the economy. President Nicolas Maduro has continued the free spending socialist revolution started by the predecessor late Hugo Chavez almost 20 years ago. Key to the populist rhetoric used by both is a constant drumbeat of warnings that the U.S. empire is going to plan an invasion to steal Venezuela, which is going to happen. That's what Maduro has been right all the time. But this is what happened 1 hour ago. This is what the Chicago Tribune, the Trump administration imposed sweeping Venezuela sanctions on Venezuela. That was a couple of weeks ago. It looks like it's cooled off. I'm not sure if Trump's actually gone to Venezuela. Appear like it looks like it kind of cooled off. The whole North Korea thing through actually really Kim Jong-un was the one that was actually kind of de-escalated. He said he took the idea of nuking Guam off the table. He just said that everybody needs to act responsible or something like that, which the United States has been pushing has been pushing on this for years. By having their troops right there, the DMZ, this is continuing the tensions on the Korean Peninsula. To remove their troops from the DMZ, the tensions would be significantly dropped, but they don't want to do that. So it's definitely American imperialism that has pushed this Korean situation to the brink multiple times, and it's up to America to get rid of the troops of the DMZ for any real chance of reunification of the two countries to happen. As long as the American troops are there, they'll never have reunification. The Soviets, they removed their troops in 1956 from the North, but America has left their troops 61 years after. I feel like there's no real reason now to have the American troops at the DMZ. The North is going to invade if the DMZ was removed of American troops. But they continue, and this is not a to play around with. They have nuclear weapons, and it seems like they're nearing the point of having nuclear weapons with ICBM technology. It is true that they have a nuclear weapons program, unlike Iran. So I don't think that North Korea is a country we should mess around with. And it's a dangerous game, because even if we don't get hit, if they don't have the technology to hit us, they could definitely hit one of our allies, South Korea, Japan, and millions of people could get killed if they feel threatened enough, I'm guessing. That might be like that. I'm not sure if Kim Jong-un is insane enough to do it. But ultimately, the real reason that people want anything to do with Pyongyang is because there's no wild shelf anchor. I believe there's a shit ton of rare earth metals that are under that surface in North Korea. It's not that they actually any concerns about human rights violations. And North Korea's supposed human rights violations, which may exist, about the work camps and such, it would be awful. But however, the United States supports wars around the world. Look at Saudi Arabia and multiple countries around the planet with terrible human rights breakers that the United States supports. Primarily the Gulf states is what comes to mind when we think of the United States' shady records with human rights, is that they support countries like the Emirates, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the main ones that comes to mind, where they have medieval punishment still pretty much for like petty crimes. I mean, they cut off people's hands, I think, for stealing. But this is what, talk about those Saudis, though. This is more examples of war crimes. Saudis' airstrikes kill up to 14 civilians, including children witnesses. I guess this is in Yemen. It is in Yemen. I think it was in the capital, Sanaa, where the Houthis have the capital of Yemen. Remember, they control the country, especially because they control the capital. But they do not have, and they have a lot of the cities. However, they do not have the majority of the land. Airstrikes apparently conducted by the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen have killed up to 14 civilians, including 6 children, witnesses on the ground report. The attack targeted the Faj Atan area of the southern outskirts of Sanaa. And by the way, I'm not sure if there's been massive advancements, but that was just a few months ago I looked, and they did not control the majority of Yemen, not even close. But and also reduced 2 buildings to rubble. Reuters cite local sources are saying the 2 bodies of several children appear to be as young as 10. I don't want to read through all this. This is horrible, but this is according to AP. Eyewitnesses say that at least 14 civilians were killed in the early morning airstrikes, and the death toll expected to rise. The rise of the wreckage pulled more victims from the rubble. The news comes 2 days after Saudi bombing killed dozens of people, most of them civilians, in a Sanaa hotel reportedly located next to a rebel checkpoint. So I'm not sure if I think they're calling the Houthis still rebels, even though they're ones that control the country and have been in control of the country for over 2 years. However, ultimately they're still recognizing the Hadi government. America still recognizes the Hadi government as the legitimate regime. And Saudi is. Saudi Arabia government is still recognizing the Hadi regime as the legitimate government, which is the one practicing the Houthis. However, they're now no longer in charge of the capital, and they're out in the desert mainly, but they control a lot of land. And also, ISIS is their president in Yemen. This is kind of like a mini Syria. Is what's happening there. And it's a travesty. This is thousands of people have been killed, and also this is the poorest country in the Middle East where this happened. So this is a country that's already hurting, and now it's going to be hurting a lot more. And the war has continued now for over 2 years. The Saudis have committed massive war crimes there, much like the Israelis did the Palestinians in 2014, and perhaps I think really these few years have been kind of a telling time for a lot of us people on the internet. Have seen where people stand on their level of awareness and what they really stand for, because when that whole situation happened with Israel in 2015, that's kind of it's kind of like the one that the people decided, or you saw where people stood. We saw a few Facebook friends that were douches and put I support Israel because, and I stand with Israel and stuff like that. While many were free Palestine, free Palestine, free Palestine. I think sensible person saw what the Israelis were doing to the Palestinians in that war would support. And why do I have this strong stance about Israel versus Palestine? Well, just remember that Israel ultimately came in there 70 years ago, and they were supposedly escaping persecution in Europe, but they started persecuting the Palestinians there. They came about. Their regime came about via terrorism. Look at the King David Hotel bombing, where they trusted Arabs and blew up a hotel. And they didn't apologize for the non-Jewish victims. They only apologized about the Jews that were killed in the building. And this is the kind of supremacism that they call it. The system of Jewish supremacism is Zionism. So that's what Zionism was based off of. Those three terror groups turned into, and they call themselves openly terrorist groups. They turned into the IDF. Then they would, they had what's called the tragedy of Nakba in 1948. And that's where 1 million Palestinians were displaced. Many were killed. We have now 1957. They committed mass war crimes. They're in Egypt. Against Nasser's Egypt. They bombed hospitals even to win that war. That's a story that's not told about a lot in the mainstream media. They try to make it seem like that was just a total heroic victory by the Israeli military. No, it wasn't. It was a horrific use of war crimes in order to put down a Arab response they had been doing already, and it continued on with just all throughout the last 50 years. The war crimes here and there against the Palestinians. 2014, they killed 2,000 in a couple months. I mean, there's millions of Palestinians have most likely been killed over the years by the Israeli military, because just like every other day, another person's killed by the Israeli military, a lot of times a non-combatant. And what's even considered combatant in terms of the Israelis is that combatant is a male that's defending his house, a lot of times or shoots off a rocket, a little bottle rocket, and all of a sudden that's now combatant. And then they go and they'll bomb the entire apartment complex that the rocket was shot from. These are the scary rockets that they're often talking about and scaring people that, Hamas is shooting rockets at us, so we have to level their entire country, or what we're going to call country, even though they completely occupy it pretty much, and they walled it in. The Palestinians don't have a country anymore. The Palestinians, they've lost their land. They're on little specks in the West Bank and a little tiny Gaza Strip where they've all been herded into one area. So every time they bomb, so many people die because it's densely populated. And these people live in deplorable conditions. A lot of times they don't have enough power for the day. They don't have enough supplies for the day, water, food, and they live right next to Israel that's thriving off of American tax dollars, where they get this country that does all these terrible things get over $5 billion annually from the United States, and our tax dollars. Remember that, our tax dollars, over $5 billion annually. And also, let's remember another thing, is that they get also more money from corporations that you might not even realize that you're contributing to. Look at that barcode 729. I believe they also, because of the response to it, 871 is the other one, that are made in Israel. Products made in Israel, is inadvertently helping their cause, because I know they've already passed legislation in Canada to ban the calling for boycotting of Israel. They're calling that hate speech now. But for us, it's not technically a crime yet, or I think it might be, but it's not enforced. I'm not exactly sure on that. But I don't think it's a crime yet. So until there's talk about it, though, that it might be made a crime. So let's call for it while we can, and boycott, divest, sanctions against Israel. BDS is definitely a movement that I get behind, and people BDS all the time and say, "Oh well, if you don't like Israel, then you don't like computers." They try to make themselves they're the enemy. How I said Zionism and Nazism are the two sides of the same coin. It's kind of like those white supremacists that try to make it seem like white guys are behind all the innovation in the world, and they'll say, "Oh, well, if you don't like white people, well," or they make like memes. They'll have like, "Oh, you like television? Think a white guy. Oh, you like this?" It's pretty much any invention they will accredit to a white man. Same thing with the Israelis and their supremacists. Again, Zionism and Nazism are two sides of the same coin, but looking up right now, which one? So they put 729. Oh, I believe that is also an Israeli. Okay, here it is. It's 871. Okay, I knew it's 871, and but then this is what Ireland-Palestine Solidarity Campaign. It's like this is what they have to write about it, which they do seem, I guess. Stories and images have been doing the rounds on social media sites claim that Israel changed its barcode from 729 to 871, with other numbers like 500 in order to fool people looking out for the 729 barcode. The mistaken belief from a misunderstanding of how barcodes work. A barcode only tells you which country a company is from, not where the contents of the product originate. What happens to be is that 871 is the Dutch barcode and the 501 is the UK one. And Israeli products are being sold by Dutch and UK and even Irish-based companies. To take a concrete example, in the case of Tesco Meat Freeman, Tesco is a UK-based company, so the barcode is 500, even though the product inside is manufactured and packaged in Israel. What is important for barcode purposes is where the company who sells the good the registers are registered, not where the contents of the good are produced, manufactured, or packaged. A country can't simply change its barcode assignation because it doesn't work like that. And barcode assignation is a complicated, regulated international process. This is just another reason to always look out for the country of origin of a product and not rely solely on barcodes. So it's very important to read that back again so people take note of that. This is just another reason to always look for the country of origin of a product, not rely solely on barcodes. Similarly, some things that may be made in a third country are sold by Israeli registered companies with the 729 barcode, even though that they may say made in Taiwan on the packaging. They should be boycotted too. Also, you have to look into like a list of adults that I think they donate money to Israel or something like that. They're backers of Israel. See if I pull up that image. Here there. This is a very long. This is like a picture image that shows. See, this like Mission Islam. I'm not sure if it's the most credible. It is. Probably is. I mean, a huge one. Keep in mind, Coke, which followed by Coca-Cola, but don't say Coke on them. Pepsi's another one. Let's see. McDonald's, so many different damn companies. I don't even know if it's possible. Twix, Nestle. I know. So much stuff. Cosmetics. I know. I'm pretty sure NYS behind. Like a huge one. I'm pretty sure backer of Israel. Just funny because Hugo Boss made the Nazi uniforms. Like I said, I've been saying all throughout the show. Gucci, Nivea, a lot of companies, those Huggies, Head and Shoulders. What the? I think for a lot of people, they're doing a total change of life, and I'm trying to get rid of all these companies. Shoes, Nike's a big one you have to look out for. Gap, the big one. Which, by the way, Gap also owns, I think, the Public and the Home TV. So, which is funny because I forgot Navy. I think about getting a job. I looked and I saw Gap Incorporated, one of those Navy. I said, nope, can't work there. So I'm not gonna. That's like last thing. I'm just feeling it's not. I mean, yeah, I feel like it's very hard to avoid working for like government or Israel or something like that. They always can find a place, but small business is the best bet. But I just want to feel comfortable being who I am in a company like that. And screw me over or something like that. I have to be on guard. I am a little bit paranoid, but I just know that there's programs I think like that where they can harass people, and it's helped out by the government. It's called the Vice program or something like that. And I think it goes as far as even like the use of fragrances and stuff like that to try to like slowly irritate the employees that's under question by the government. I've looked into it a little bit. It's definitely worth a research. I laughed about this. It's totally unrelated. I saw a funny meme on the top of the hour, which then we'll go into the studio hour, which we can't plan after that. So the number is 845-9223, 845-277-9223. CY.TV, and we're now getting to this afternoon. We're talking about essential War 3, Trump, who, Trump has been, it's another interesting thing that happened. I think that happened between the last show and this show, the Steve Bannon's firing, which I guess marks the official end of any kind of talk of Trump being outside the norm. Is that Bannon was kind of an outsider as it was viewed, that he really wasn't, but Bannon more represented, I guess, like the nationalists that backed Trump and people, the non-interventionists, all those people, like Bannon apparently called out his Afghanistan policy. A lot of non-interventionists that backed Trump would have all, more represented like the Bannon side of his cabinet, but now it seems like Kushner and General Kelly, the neocons, have now 100% shown themselves to be in support of Donald Trump, and Donald Trump has, shown himself to be just another neocon like George Bush, or, Kagan, Cheney, and many others. And this happened very quickly, just in a few months. It became very apparent that, neocon. I knew from the beginning, however, that Trump was one of the people in the system. I called that out long before people realized it. But it's weird how people still want to refuse it. They still think that he's not part of the establishment and that Trump is some kind of rebel or something like that. Trump is definitely a member of the establishment and is a shill, in my opinion. And you just look at his ties to Israel, look at the fact that how hard he defended Israel during his campaign. That was one of the biggest warning signs, is that he said that if Israel will stop being treated as a second-class citizen, when Israel's been all but catered to by the American government since the beginning. And, you have the American people's tax money. Like I said, the number earlier, over $5 billion a year, $15 million daily is being sent from America to Israel to back a thriving state. While we have countries over here cities over here that are crumbling. We have Detroit, many of those Midwest cities that really could use that money, but they ain't getting anything. We have many people here that are in poverty. That this country has 50% of the people are like below poverty and 80% of the people are at they're one paycheck away from going homeless. So we're in a very dire state with our economy, really. Is that even though their economy might have bounced back from the recession quickly, it's like a permanent damage done to our economy by the Federal Reserve, by inflation, or money being devalued. The fact is that our money is worth 30 times less than it was at the time of the Federal Reserve's creation, 3 times. We have certain items that are just going really skyrocketing through inflation. Like, for example, the cost of food really went up. And part of the thing contributing to the poverty in America is the fact that people are starting to no longer be able to afford food. And soon it'll be to the point where we're going to have the first real case of abstract poverty. And that's where you can't even feed yourself. In a first world country, that should never happen. But America's slipping into third world statistics. Another number they should look at is that the amount of people that are living on $2 a day or less has quadrupled in the last 20 years. So we're definitely not in people are like trying to say that Trump is making America great again. It's that I don't see him tackling making any real efforts to tackle these kind of issues and moving our tax dollars from Saudi Arabia and Israel back to America. And Trump's talk is populist talk with like many different candidates throughout history. They had a populist talk to get elected or get the support when they were selected by who. And once that happened, once they actually became president, all of that eroded and they became another globalist. I don't think that a real populist president hasn't existed since the time of John F. Kennedy. And, it just in his 2 years, he did a lot for America. And the major thing was that he was tackling the Federal Reserve. And he did that within 2 years of his election. June 4th, 1953, Executive Order 1110 would have tackled the Federal Reserve, but they killed him for it. And Operation Northwoods, and also he wanted to prevent nuclear Israel because he knew once nuclear Israel came about, there would never be peace again in the Middle East. And they're a country with nuclear weapons illegally that complains about other countries that make nuclear weapons, like supposedly Iran is supposedly illegally, even though they have their own nuclear weapons program illegally. They helped with the nuclear weapons program of apartheid South Africa, the fascist regime that existed there prior to the time of Nelson Mandela that most of the world rejected by the end. In South Africa, they helped get nuclear weapons, which apparently they don't have them anymore. But the apartheid regime of South Africa, it was despicable. It was awful. And people don't realize, some of the people that are supposedly anti-Zionists will say that the apartheid South African regime was somehow good because white people weren't being repressed, and that ultimately they were working with each other. Again, like I said, another example of hardline white supremacists working with Zionists has happened more times than the supposed connections between black power people and the Zionists. Zionists don't help the black power people ever, really, unless there's like a direct, unless there's a point of division made that they're trying to create. Zionists don't like black people. The hardline Zionists, they don't. I mean, look what they do to Jews that are black in our country. Part of the Zionist ideology goes further than just something about Jews, but it has to be a certain type of Jew. Is that when it comes to black Jews, they don't like them. They sterilize them there in Africa, in Israel. They're coming from countries like Ethiopia and such. They're hoping to get refuge where they, weren't really accepted back in their own countries, and that they'll finally get refuge in Israel, and then they get greeted by that. Is that ultimately racism is a huge problem in Israel. I think it's a problem with Zionist community worldwide, because the people that are hardcore Zionists oftentimes do not like black people. So this idea that Zionists are behind these black power groups that sometimes the white supremacists tried to say, I can't really think of one example where it's really where they actually do a legitimate black power group. There's phony examples of I think that maybe back something like the new Black Panther Party, that's the divisive party that plays into the politics of the day, the divisive politics. They did not support the whole campaign. They also, love to say that, the Zionists behind people like Che Guevara. There's no real evidence of that, but there's definitely real evidence that the Zionists collaborated with the Nazis, collaborated with multiple fascist regimes prior to, or after the war. I think, they also like to say that the Zionists backed Fidel Castro and said that Fidel Castro was secretly a Jew. And when this is crackpot theories that this is the kind of stuff that ultimately gets all those people in the alternative media treated badly, and that's why we have to call out in the alternative media. Fortunately, I think that's why we have to call out fascists in our ranks, is because they use that against us. I see more and more mainstream media calling out people like me, calling out people like the other guys here on UCY and stuff like that, saying peddlers of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. That ultimately, if we call out the people that are actually, supposedly anti-Jewish because I won't even say anti-Semitic, Semitic people, Palestinians, most of the people that are referring as Jewish are not anti-Semitic, but if we can call out these people, maybe perhaps we have a fighting chance in the eyes of the public. But the problem is that a lot of people don't take us seriously because they think that we're all racist fucks, pretty much. It's like there's other forms of racism in the alternative media. I think people like Mark Dice, that pretty much puts his covert and subtle racism towards black people in there. While really, I can't recall the last time they called it Israel. As I said, is that Mark Dice, I believe, is 100% a shill, and will probably be on Fox News eventually, as he seems to have. He no longer even considers himself like a part of the conspiracy theorists. I guess he just sees himself as a conservative media analyst. That's what he calls himself now, conservative media analyst. And I'm not sure if he considers that part of the truth movement, conspiracy theorist movement, but he doesn't call himself a conspiracy theorist anymore, which I know is a derogatory term against us. But I say truth or anything like that. He's a conservative media analyst. Mark Dice, shill. Other shills that you could look out for, they are considering themselves outside the mainstream. People like Richard Spencer, shill. Look at, I think David Duke is a shill, to be honest. And, his involvement in Charlottesville spoke volumes to me. I mean, come on. Is that he played right into this idea that the left-right divide in America. David Duke played right into it, and he was there at that march. Other shows include people like Augustus Invictus, which you gotta say more if you know anything about that guy. Look it up. He used to be part of the Libertarian Party here in Florida, actually, but now he's becoming kind of like nationally recognized as a white supremacist fascist guy. We knew that he was that here, and that's why a lot of people left the Libertarian Party in Florida, and they went to they just couldn't. They couldn't. They were angry at the fact that he was allowed to even participate in the primaries and such, as a guy that had no libertarian real beliefs. He just wanted a third party to be a part of. Now he's a Republican, I believe. In fact, yeah, I believe he's going to be running against Rick Scott in the primaries for Senate or something like that, or made governor. I'm not exactly sure. I think it's the Senate. Either way, those are two turds that I wouldn't vote for either one of them, Rick Scott or Augustus Invictus, who, again, I say is really an ultimate definition of controlled opposition. I mean, this guy has, I'm not sure, but he has a weird pagan, I may potentially satanic beliefs. I'm not exactly sure. I think he's a pagan, but that's why he's got the weird name Augustus Invictus. One of the guys, Adrian Wiley, who was running as the Libertarian candidate for governor of Florida at the time that shortly before, I think, before he actually was putting in his name to be running for Senate in Florida. Adrian Wiley claimed that when he asked him if he actually believed this stuff about genocide, Augustus Invictus replied, "That's my religion." So somebody who claims that genocide is part of his religion. I don't know if that should have any support whatsoever, but people do support him. But I don't think that's ever gone to the public, but Adrian Wiley did out him out on his Facebook page. Believe it or not, I actually interviewed that guy, the candidate, Libertarian Party candidate for governor in 20. It was my first ever interview that I did on the radio back in 2013. December 18th, 2013, on WW3 Radio. If you look way back, you can find it. I'll pull it up sometime, and I'll bring it to my Facebook page, which you haven't subscribed yet. Subscribe to Chris Jackson Rojas on Chris Jackson Rojas on Facebook. I do podcasts every now and then on there, and also I'm posting all kinds of links and articles all the time, every day, onto Chris Jackson Rojas' Facebook page. If I'm not, might be out, might be doing the radio like right now, which, by the way, I hope everyone enjoyed today's radio program here at Voice of Rebellion Radio with your host, Chris J. But yeah, you got to watch out for controlled opposition. And also another example of controlled opposition are the people that are a sign to look out is the people that are heavily pushing the Venezuela propaganda. That Venezuela's economic problems alone have caused the situation in Venezuela, not CIA sabotage, not CIA interference and sanctions, and also the supermarket chains hoarding food that are against the Maduro government. People that think, oh, it has nothing to do with that. It's all the economics, that kind of thing. If you look out for those people, then that's one way of getting essentially a plan. I'm not saying that they believe that they're automatically a plan. They could be just duped and believe in false information. But if you see the main pushers of that kind of stuff, that's a major red flag. Another big red flag are the people that refuse to call out Israel under any circumstances, and even when questioned about it, will backtrack, or they'll say stuff like, or they might say stuff like, "Oh, there's bad guys on both sides, Israel and Palestine." When asked about Israel, big red flag right there. Because of course, and people that that been into the alternative media for years, but never said anything about Israel once. That's also another major thing, because that at least crossed their mind a couple times. People have asked them about it, but they refuse to say anything. That's a massive warning sign. Other warning signs would include also racism being used against black people, crackpot theories, that no one's going to believe, makes us look, even to yourself, it's like, oh, that's crazy shit. That are just there to make us look, or theories that are there to discredit legitimate revolutionaries and legitimate revolutions. The kind of people that will say that, like I said, that ignore historical facts and will ignore the collaboration between Zionists and white supremacists, but will try to make up this supposed collaboration between Zionists and black power movements around the world, African leaders and stuff like that don't actually exist, but it's convenient to their political ideology, and that a very twisted and perverted political ideology at that. But I'm going to thank everyone who tuned in today to Stay Bold Radio, also UCY.TV, though I think we are past the cutoff. Like this part won't be on UCY, but I think everyone, and we are in the last couple seconds here of the regular broadcast, and then we're going to go into studio hours. So we didn't get any calls today. Hopefully we get the calls next week. I may be going live. So just a little refresher on the call-in numbers for the two shows. 845-277-9223 if we're doing a stable radio broadcast. 845-277-9223 if you're listening from stable radio. Or if it's a live broadcast on UCY.TV, the call number there is 718-717-8296. 718-717-8296. It's now 2 o'clock Eastern Time, and I'm about to be signing off here in a second. So everybody stay vigilant, stay informed about what's going on in Venezuela, Syria, Iran, Ukraine, all those countries, and definitely stay informed out there. Make sure you're not watching the propaganda, the enemy's transmission, to ensure that you're actually getting